Cool. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. And again, apologies for English. I need to go spend some time with Mario and like get my Spanish down before we can try this. So Michael and I are going to do a I guess I'm going to do a short presentation with some big ideas from the book. And then we are going to take questions. So if you've submitted questions in advance, thank you. And if you have any questions that you develop along the way or based on what we talk about, feel free to stick them in the chat. So let me share my screen. All right. And of course, I should ask, can everybody see my screen?
It
Perfect.
looks great.
Awesome. If anybody, and if there's any like admin things that I need to do, please feel free to let me know and I'll turn this off so I can go do it and join you again. So, hey everybody, welcome. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I am Andy Welfle, and joining me is Michael Metz. And I am using the wrong slide deck. And I am now using the right slide deck. My friend and co-author here, Michael, is a senior UX architect at Allstate, which is an insurance company in the US in the Chicago area. And his job is focused a lot on conversation design. And I am a UX content strategy manager at Adobe in San Francisco. And I have a small team of UX writers working in our software. And we both use he, him pronouns. So we're going to talk to you today for about 20 minutes. Basically about the thesis of what our book is about, why writing is designing. I would guess that if you are connected to a group like UX Writers España, you probably understand that, and you probably also agree that writing is a form of design. But if you don't, I hope that you by the end you will agree. And if you do already, like we're just kind of trying to give you some talking points. So when you need to convince your coworkers and your colleagues that you are a designer as well, maybe you have the words to do it. So we'll start with just a really powerful example of why words are a form of design. And that's something as simple as this, right? This is an American food delivery app. Do you have DoorDash in Spain? Okay, I'm sure you have something very.
Yeah, we have Deliveroo and we have things.
Yeah, Deliveroo, something very similar. And essentially, you see this. The layout looks very familiar. You know, you have a little menu screen where you can order food. Mario, tacos are not on the screen, so I want to apologize for that. I guess this is this is an Italian restaurant here, and then you have like a checkout flow, you know, so you can pay for your food. So this is great. This is very well designed. It's very well laid out. But what happens when you take the words away? You're left with something like this, and this I think just is a powerful example of how unusable this becomes when you don't have words here, right? Like that title screen. The onboarding flow, you have a really nice little illustration. You have some dots that maybe shows that you're, excuse me real quick here. You have some dots that show why, apologies, I just cleared out of this here. Okay, some dots to show like, you know, that there are more other like modes within here. That next screen, you can see that there's a list and there's some stars for maybe a rating system, but you don't quite know what that's for or what it is that you're rating. And that last screen, you can kind of see that, you know, there's some options there and there's a map. So it has something to do with your location, but maybe you're not sure. All this to say that words and designs are as integral and have to be just extremely interconnected in order to make a system work. So in order to find the right words to put there, writing and design need to team up in your brain and work together. There's a really great article from 2014 by a woman named Nicole Fenton. She's the co-author of a book called Nicely Said, which is definitely inspirational and just instrumental in the work that Michael and I do. And this blog post is honestly sort of like the thesis of the big ideas that we're working on. So I won't read this whole thing, but essentially what she's saying is, I don't write fiction or short stories. I use language to solve problems, whether that's behind the scenes or in the product itself. I use words as material. And that is that is exactly what UX writers do, right? Like we are designing with words, which is a term I think that you've probably heard over and over again, but it's so true. So in my own work, this shows up all the time, right? Like a designer will come to me and he'll be, Andy, we have this button that completes a flow. What should that button say? I'll think about this. Okay, well, you know, let's think about this. So the writer side of my brain might ask, what are the right words for this button? Is it done? Is it continue? Is it finish? Is it complete? Is it something else? Like what should that word be? What should those words be if there are multiple words that need to be strung together? So the UX writer or the designer side of my brain has all these other questions, right? Like we need to find out what are the entry and the exit points for these buttons. What actions immediately follows pressing this button? Are we even using the right messaging component here? Should it be a button, or should it be a dialog box, or should it be a little toast pop-up, or should it be something else? What's the inverse action of this button? So if it says follow, should it say unfollow? If it says, you know, like a big conversation I'm sure that people at Facebook had when they rolled out the idea of friending somebody as an action. What's the opposite of that? Is it unfriend? Is it disfriend? Is it something else? How does that button translate or localize? Are we using words that make sense in many other languages? At Adobe, we translate into 36 other languages. Does it make sense in those languages? And then also, does it fit within our voice and tone strategy? Are we trying to say something that's really bubbly and conversational, like "got it," when maybe that doesn't really like fit? So all this to say is, we have to look at that button, that single element in context, right? We can't just look at it in isolation. We have to consider the screen that kind of happens around it. So that's kind of why we say, you know, writing is about fitting words together. Designing is about solving problems for your users. And we end up with saying, like, hey, we design with words. There's a really good metaphor that I like to use. This is not at all original to me. This is from a book called The Elements of User Experience by Jesse James Garrett. If ever you've talked to or seen a presentation by Jonathan Coleman, who's a friend of ours, he uses something very similar to this. But essentially from the book, what this means is, what Jesse James Garrett is saying is that UX happens in layers, right? You have sort of this abstract strategy layer, which is the reason we're creating something. And on top of that, you keep building other layers. You have a scope layer where you're thinking about the requirements of the thing you're building, right? Like, are we building an MVP? What's the roadmap for this? What's the budget for this? How do we resource this? You have a system layer, which is kind of how the system behaves and how users interact, kind of like with the system as a whole. And of course, you have a surface layer, which is how the thing itself will look and feel and sound, right? That's when you're thinking about the Chrome, the surface of your app or whatever you're designing. So typically, visual designers and content designers are working in parallel. They each have deliverables along the way here. So visual designers are thinking about design strategies, right? How the thing will behave and how it will look, how it will feel. And content designers are thinking about the content strategy, right? This is the classic kind of definition of planning and creating and managing content throughout the whole product. So teams should be working together to develop timelines and deliverables and roadmaps, things like that. When you get to the system layer, designers are thinking about design system stuff, right? Like component documentation and content or patterns, et cetera, things like that. Well, content designers are thinking about stuff like grammar mechanics, style guides, content patterns, thinking a lot about terminology, although you're probably also thinking about terminology at that strategy layer. And finally, as designers are thinking about what we usually call the screens, right? Like the actual Sketch or Figma or XD documents and the components and the workflows. UX writers, content designers are thinking about the UX writing, which is to say microcopy, buttons, dialogues, errors, that kind of stuff. Which is all to say, like, you know, there's a argument that I think is probably more prevalent in the US about what it is that we call ourselves. Are we UX writers? Are we content designers? Are we content strategists? Or something else? For the purpose of this, we're not even going to get into that now. We are the words people, and that could be a designer, that could be a project manager, that could be somebody in QA. Yeah, that's an argument for a different time, for sure. So typically, if words are such an important part of design, why do we think about design in terms of visual tools, right? Like we think about all of the really great design tools out there that are complicated to use. There's Sketch, there's Figma, there's Adobe XD, there's a whole host of other ones, which are important and which are great tools for making really high fidelity deliverables. But if you're designing for an interface like this, right, this is a Google Home, just like a chat interface, which of those apps should I use to design this? Right, you could use any of those apps to design like a conversation happening here, but you could also use a text editor. Michael is a experienced conversation designer, and he can whip up a workflow pretty quickly, just kind of like mock it up and prototype it in a text editor, which is really simple. So yeah, so one thing that we just want to make sure you know is don't mistake making a deliverable with making a difference, right? It's the impact that you have by working on that product and thinking strategically about the words themselves, rather than designing something that you're delivering. I just heard a chime on my end. I want to take a quick break and figure that out. Do we need to admit more people? Do you know?
Yeah, most likely people start because people join late.
Sure, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for just a
Cool.
minute and take a break and go see
Yes,
if we need to do that.
okay.
It seems like everybody's in here.
It might be that people are just joining late. This
Okay,
tends to
cool.
happen with something.
Sounds good. Sorry about that, everybody. And let me go back.
There we go. It's amazing how you can just like go back and forth, man.
Yeah,
Jealous.
I've been. I don't know how how often I can do this, but cool. So let's jump into this. We should talk about some just broad principles for UX writing. We try to steer away from the terms best practices, just because the needs that somebody at like writing for Adobe has is much different than writing for DoorDash or writing for Allstate or writing for other interfaces. So best practices are really kind of like hard to follow and to come by, but we have some really good principles about how we feel and what we talk in the book about, like our writing should be. So we really feel that it should be usable, that it should be useful, and that it should be responsible. So I'm going to kind of dig into the differences here. I struggled for a long time with what the difference between usable and useful is, because the words, are very similar. On the surface, they have such a similar definition. But essentially, let's talk about this one first. Essentially, what we're saying by how your writing should be usable, it should mean that your users should be able to do stuff with it. Right, they should be able to like actually use the words in here rather than read the words and then use something else. So this is a very real example from somebody on my team. If ever you've used Adobe products, you know that there is an accompanying Creative Cloud mobile app, and in that mobile app there is a list of tutorials that you can learn, that you can watch to learn how to use Photoshop or Illustrator or any one of those kind of complicated tools. So we used to have a string of text at the bottom of the list that said, "Hey, not finding what you're looking for? Tap on the search icon next to your profile picture," which was great. It was useful. It taught you to, or told you to like go perform a search to find tutorials that can like better help you do your job. But we felt like we could make that better, right? Like it was useful, but we wanted to try to make it usable. So Marissa, my teammate, changed that to say, use search to find more tutorials. It's a lot shorter. It's about a third of the length that it was before. And harnessing the power of interactive design, she made that search word tappable. So you could actually launch the search experience from that. So all of a sudden you have a string of text that is actually useful instead of just, usable instead of useful. So essentially, yeah, it really helps to find out if people can use the words that you've written. And one way to do that, of course, is through user testing. And it's a topic that we have a whole chapter about in our book. I wish we had more time here to talk through that. Have you all ever had Sarah Richards on your on this program?
Not yet, but we would love to have her.
Uh,
So
you
do you
should
have
definitely get
her?
Sarah Richards. Yeah,
I
yeah, she's
I
really
know.
fantastic. She wrote a book called Content Design. And she really says that if the words you write for something aren't accessible to everyone, you've made a design choice that prevents people from using that thing. We'll get into accessibility pretty deeply in our book and in the workshop series that we do. But essentially, if you are not writing for your audience, for everybody in your audience, it just does not work. You know, you see something like often like a phone tree, like if you're using a customer service like a customer service interface, you've probably seen this. It's something that just doesn't really work for you and you get frustrated and you hang up. I think that customer service behavior is really important, and we have that validated. We talked to a cognitive psychologist for our book named Melanie Polkowski, and she conducted a huge study about customer service behavior, and she found that one of the four most important usability factors in customer service experiences was what had to do with stuff that we as UX writers can influence. Customer service behavior. It's related to the friendliness and the politeness of the system. It's related to its speaking pace. It's related to its use of familiar terms. And the more accessible those things are, the more highly it scores and the more usable it is. So those are things that we as writers can directly influence, right? Like we control sort of like the friendliness and the politeness. We're thinking about like your voice. It's speaking pace and use of familiar terms. You're thinking about like terminology and tone and cadence. So those are all things that we can kind of directly influence. Dr. Pokolsky said, human communication is the most important gift that we have, whether it's through whether it's through speech or through writing. I really do think that human beings are worth fighting for, especially as technology overtakes more and more of what it means to be human. So of course your writing should be usable, but it should also be useful. This is something that we encountered, and we talk a little bit about the book. It's a hotel and resort brand, and when you sign up for their loyalty program, you might see a screen that looks like this, right? And this is really complicated. Look at all the things that you are either opting into or opting out of. So you see, yes, I want to register for the loyalty program, and I've read the terms and service. Yes, I want to receive information about special offers and promotions from the website and accept the terms detailed in the privacy clause. But if you do not want to receive commercial information, click here. It doesn't give you a way to opt out of that with that check mark. And also it says that you have to like accept, you know, these privacy details if you want to register for the loyalty program. But wait, there's another check mark too that you can check that says, I do not want to receive advertisements. So if any of you are involved in work like this, you probably know what happened here, right? Like somebody a few years ago at Grand Malia Hotels and Resorts was saying, oh, guys, we have this new thing called the GDPR. We have to make it compatible with GDPR. And let's just slap a check mark on here that says I don't want to receive advertisements. They're like, okay, let's do that. So this is frustrating. You don't really know what you're opting in and out of when you click this. This is not useful writing. There are some other things that are useful. If anybody here uses Pinterest, well, on top of that, if anybody here uses Pinterest and you actually read the Pinterest terms of service, which is probably a little bit more unlikely, at the bottom of each section, you have your kind of legal information, and underneath that you have something called more simply put, which is to say that they use plain language to kind of describe what it is that they're talking about up there to make it a lot more useful. How could you have made this better, or how could Pinterest have made this better? They could actually make the language itself that plain and simple, so they don't have to have like a special section to say that. But of course, there's a lot of legal and compliance reasons maybe why that didn't happen. But yeah, this is something that goes above and beyond what a lot of terms of service go to. So it's really important that writers understand a product's purpose and the user's needs in order to really create useful experiences. We interviewed a really talented designer and writer named Katie Lauer for the book. And she said, I feel like I always need the full context of what I'm solving for. So it's best for my work when I'm able to be in environments where I can get it. If you're joining a project at the very end and there's low tolerance for questions, it's a sign that your role as a writer hasn't been well positioned or isn't well understood. I imagine this connects with a lot of people in the audience if you're working on design teams. It sure does for me, because often I come in too late, and the words that I'm writing aren't super useful, super usable, because it's already being constrained by the interaction. So this is exactly why, if you're there from the beginning, from early on, it's the better. If there was a writer from the beginning of that Grand Malia Resorts project, you probably wouldn't have ended up with just a mess like that, right? So, yeah, this is such a good reason for why writers should be able to work as early as possible on design teams. So finally, and maybe most important, your writing should be responsible. If anybody uses LinkedIn a lot, you probably know that when you're sending messages, you get these little like automated responses in the bottom. This is something, a real life example from Michael, where he was noticing on LinkedIn that one of his friends and colleagues was let go from their job. And so Michael, being the very kind person that he is, reached out to them and said, "Hey, I saw your message on LinkedIn. I'm so sorry to hear what happened. If I can help in any way to connect you with somebody, please let me know. Feel free to reach out." And that person responded and said, "Thanks a ton, Michael. I appreciate the support. I'm taking a couple days to process everything, and we'll start the job hunt early next week." So if Michael just wanted to like use one of these automated responses, he's presented with these options. So there's good luck, which, like, okay, that is like, that person could use some luck, and that's a appropriate response. There's sounds good, which is fine. It's a little brusque. Or he could tap congratulations, which is not appropriate. In fact, if he tapped that instead of congratulations, no, he could damage his relationship with that person. So you can understand why the triggering logic, kind of algorithmically, it may have come up with something like this. But that, you know, and oftentimes a writer cannot directly influence that actual triggering logic. But at the beginning, when they're coming up with these list of responses, a writer really can and should think about all the cases where this could be used in a harmful way or in a wrong way. And you can flag value judgments like congratulations and say like, hey, what if this shows up for somebody who was fired for their job in the rare occasion that it might, and just kind of like make that known from the beginning. Try to flag that stuff. So yeah, that's you can just easily sound like a complete jerk to somebody who lost their job, for sure. This is another kind of great example of situations where something is a lot less complicated than it seems. A few years ago, I bought a Fitbit, and I went on to the Fitbit website to fill out my profile. And in addition to asking me like my location and my age and my name and my height and my weight and my kind of like average calorie intake, it asked me something like this, which is a really easy option for me. I am a cisgender male. I identify as male, and so it was an easy choice. But a lot of people, that is not an easy choice. Think about the experience that a trans woman might have. So we actually interviewed somebody named Ada Powers for the book. And if anybody's active on UX Twitter, you may be familiar with Ada. She is, first of all, she's hilarious. She has an amazing sense of humor. She's a UX designer. She's a community activist, and she's a transgender woman. We interviewed her for the book, and we talked a little bit about this particular option. And I'm just going to kind of quote what she said here. Ada Powers says, "Now I want to get the most out of my Fitbit, so I really want to understand where they're coming from. Normally, I'd assume that Fitbit is awkwardly asking me about my gender for demographic information, so maybe they can market, ads to me. So I would just pick female. But then they also ask me for my height and my weight and my caloric intake, so maybe they're looking for biological rather than demographic information. Should I answer male because of my supposed chromosomes? Or should I answer female because the dominant sex hormone in my body is estrogen?" But it gets even more complicated than that. If I answer female, do they assume that I'm interested in menstruation tracking? What if I were a cisgender woman who doesn't have a uterus, or if I have one that doesn't function normatively? Do they use it to assume hormone levels for their calorie burning models? Or what about people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which can cause relatively higher levels of testosterone? Ada went on to say that if Fitbit was thinking about inclusivity, they'd understand that some questions don't have easy answers. By explaining what they want to know and why, it not only helps people on the margins like me, but anyone who may not be easily categorized, and gets them an even better quality information to act on. It's a win-win for the user and for the company. So how could Fitbit have made this better? Well, they could have given a lot more context and been transparent about why they're asking for that information and to tell you what they're doing with it, which would be huge. Like, I really wish Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all those companies would let us know what they're doing with our information, right? So this example is from something that might be pretty uniquely American. This is from a private healthcare company about why they're asking for your sex, for your gender. And this is a very long message. We could probably figure out how to shorten this, but they're actually giving context. We require this field because of the many ways we use this information in communicating with your health insurance provider. That's why I said this was American. You probably don't have to worry about health insurance providers. Please make sure that the sex you provide here is the same as what your insurance provider has on file. Usually the same as what your human resources department at work has on file. Because of course our health insurance is tied to our job, which makes no sense. Anyhow, I'm editorializing here. If you would like to tell us more about your gender identity, please click on the Add Gender Information button, which is right there below it. That information will not be shared outside of One Medical. Our entire team is committed to making sure every member feels safe, welcome, and respected. So they're kind of telling you why they need to know this information, and they're kind of giving you an option to talk about why this could be less straightforward than you might think, which is a really good approach there. Natalie Yee, who is a designer and somebody we interviewed for the book, says that we know that words can really hurt people, or it can really help them in their personal lives. We can say really reassuring words to people and it has this huge impact. We can say hurtful words and it can have a years-long impact. We don't really treat the words we write in interfaces that way. And I'll leave you with this idea. Think about the concept of a news feed, right? Like, you know, I think Facebook is one of the first to pioneer this. LinkedIn has one. Heck, like my Microsoft Teams account has a news feed now, like for work. So everybody has a news feed. We talked to Jorge Arango. He's an information architect. It's a really fantastic book and podcast. And he said that news is the feedback mechanism of our society. We vote based on the things that we learn in the news. When we take a concept like that and we subvert it for commercial use, that's something that should really give us pause. So that's something to think a lot about. If you're taking news and information that you take in very seriously and you are selling that, and all of a sudden you change the incentive structures based on that, that's a really big responsibility and something that we should think a lot about what we're doing. So thank you so much. I appreciate you listening to me talk for 35 minutes. And I think Michael and I would really love to take some of your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, and kind of dig into those.
So thank you so much. Just give me a sec. Let me close the door because the kids just came in, obviously.
Oh, no problem. Hey, kids. You should put them on screen. I want to hear their questions.
You sure about it? How big are you on Frozen and the Paw Patrol?
Oh, man. Michael, I assume you know more about Paw Patrol than I do.
Paw Patrol. I know there's they're all dogs and they have service jobs like firefighting.
Yeah. Do they have any UX writer dogs?
I don't think there's a UX writer dog. What would that one be named if there was a UX writer dog? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Mario, we're just talking about, are there any UX writer dogs in Paw Patrol?
Not that I know of, but we could always think about what would it.
Yeah.
It'd be weird, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that curveball. Anywho, okay. So thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Let's get into like the Q&A portion of the show, if you're okay with that. Yeah. So let me see. Let's get cracking. Okay. Okay, so here's the one. A question from Jesus. A question about helping AI people in teams. How can we get them to value more UX writing? especially since they think writers are going to be replaced by AI mostly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that. Are you talking about AI systems like conversational interfaces, or are you talking about like, I think there was this, I forget the name of it, OpenAI released something that can like write articles automatically. What was that question more around, Jesus, if you don't mind expanding?
If you want to unmute Jesus, or you want to type, whatever is easier, because I understand like always like speaking up might be hard to, whatever you want. Jesus. Okay, so
I could broadly interpret that question.
there we go.
Oh,
yes,
says, yeah.
helping value the conversational value for AI that's implemented. So I'm guessing it's more on like, yeah, how is AI, is it going to take our jobs or not? And how do we make people understand that it's worth to invest in the role rather than just wait for the computer takeover, I guess, the robot takeover.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the AI's job is writing, this is a really interesting question. We've never gotten one like it. I think like if the AI's job is writing, from my experience, working with AI systems, it's going to require more writing effort to train that algorithm properly, to program the system well. So it's not that writers are replaced, it's that they're in a different part of the process. So that said, I also think that this is pretty unlikely scenario. Like if anyone's thinking that writers will be replaced by AI, I mean, I'm involved in teams that work in emerging technology. And I mean, we are a long way from where that could be possible. A lot of AI is pretty rudimentary in its capabilities, and it's not strategic. That's another thing that's really important to remember. That strategic mindset, that systems thinking mindset that we bring, and also the ability to represent stress cases and do this responsibly is more important in the age of AI than ever. So I think all those reasons speak to why the people on this call are really well positioned to contribute to those teams.
Which is one of the reasons we're, asking writers to be more strategic and think about sort of like the design methodology of what they're doing instead, right? Like if they're just sort of like not strategically just writing words into an interface, like that is not, that is something that potentially could be replaced. But if you're thinking about the system and the strategy behind it, you're definitely well positioned to be training these AIs and to like be populating this model for sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit about like what John Coleman is saying lately, right? So like to avoid dusting the content and rather like dig in deep and focus on what's the problem you're trying to solve from like a content perspective rather than just like, let me like button.
Yeah.
Cool. So thank you for that. I hope that answers your question, Jesus. Dude, this feels like a radio show. This is amazing. Next one up, we got one from caller Laura Ochoa. Her question is, how can we effectively communicate to our team the importance of our role? And thank you so much for the session.
Yeah, if we knew the answer to that, we would be great. Yeah. Michael, you have a really good, I've heard you kind of like talk about this a lot. I don't want to put you in the spot, but in the book you talk about like, kind of show your value by doing what needs to be done, right?
Yeah, I hate to be contrarian, but like I'd almost say communicating the importance of your role is not the way to go about it. That's just my take personally. I feel like there's a sense like right now in the past week or so, there's been a lot of talk on the internet about what we should call ourselves, the people who do what we do. And honestly, I don't think that conversation is like it's moving us forward, really. Like it's not helping us focus on the critical problems we need to solve. And so that's how I would say you can communicate the importance of your role, by getting involved in the problems, by being interested in the other people on your team and what they're dealing with and what their frustrations are, and then seeing how the skills you have can help solve those problems. So as I talk to other people in the industry, especially people who are senior, that's what they say too. They say like, get in there, get involved, solve problems. Don't worry too much about the role or what you think it should be doing. And I would also say, like, when you read a book like ours, when I was getting started, I'd read a book and I'd be like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. You know, like that's what the role should be. There's all these great things. And I want to emphasize, like, we're not doing everything we write about in the book in our day jobs, day to day. But we think they're good ideas that we can all strive for and work towards. So that's
do as I say,
thing.
not as I do.
Yeah, like that's another thing to remember is like some things just won't work out in your organization. Do I wish that as an insurance company, they would write their policies like Pinterest so that it'd be plain language? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, but I'll keep bringing it up as something we should focus on. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Like when you think about the role, don't try to make it so that you're trying to transform everything right away. That's another thing I would say.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Mr. Welfle?
No, I think Michael nailed it.
And also, if I may, I also think there's one key point that you've shared on Twitter, Michael, is like, make it about them, right? Yeah. So you know what you can do as your role, but you can't come and like, stop what you're doing. This is how we're going to work. It's like, right. Use the same design principles. It's like, in the end, they're going to be your users, especially if they've never worked with a UX writer. It's like, so what is it your problem? Okay, great. These are the skill sets that I can do. Let's work together to make that happen. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's you, man. So it's always here.
Yeah.
So next question. This comes from Jose Barrera. I'd like to know at a high level, the best practice from your experience to include a UX writer in the design process work of a team. So what would you suggest to get people in early?
Jose, I'd really love to know, are you, like, if there's a specific, like, specifically if you're asking how to fit in a UX writer into a design team for the first time, is this something you're trying to kind of like figure out where they fit in for the first time, or is this just kind of in general? And if you, feel free to speak up if you'd like.
Yeah,
I see.
Feel free to
yeah, I'm not a UX writer, but one joined us recently. So that was kind of my challenge a few years ago when I started at Adobe. I was the first UX writer among the design team, and a lot of my early days was spent just trying to figure out, like, how to fit my process into the larger process and how to adapt my process for like the Adobe way, which had years and years and years of kind of an established process. So for me, what that meant was finding a team that could really use like a UX writer and could really, like, the value could really be apparent, but then also finding somebody who has the time and the willingness to experiment, right? Like we tried some stuff out and sometimes it didn't work, so we tried something else out. Sometimes that takes a little bit more time and a little bit more energy and resources. So I wanted to be sure that, like, it really worked. And for us, like, I found that right team, and I learned all about the very complicated, drawn out design and approval process at Adobe. I just kind of figured out how I contribute and where I fit in each step of that way. So really understanding your company's engagement model is important. I personally hate process. I'm very bad at process, and I had to sort of like learn to adapt to it and to love it. I operate best in chaos, as Michael can attest in our writing of our book. So I had to kind of like learn how to apply that process to me and how to articulate my process to the team. So it's a little bit of a give and take. You have to adapt. Your UX writer has to adapt to your company's process, but also your company has to adapt to your UX writer's process for sure. Anything to add to that, Michael?
It's interesting. Jose is calling you out in the chat here about the line, "I'm not a UX writer, but one joined us recently." What do you mean by that, Andy?
What?
Oh, you said I'm not a UX writer, but one joined us recently. I imagine you still do UX writing in your role, right?
That came from
No,
Jose.
I was just quoting what Jose said.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. I was
Oh my God.
So you're saying anything?
Do you know something I don't know?
Wait, do we have the right Andy?
Yeah. Wait, who am I?
Are we having?
Who are you? Who are you people?
Okay, got it. Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, well, what I was gonna say about that, so now it makes more sense knowing that it's coming from Jose. It is like you don't have to have that as your title to be doing it, you know, and that's what I mean about this whole titles conversation. Lots of people do UX writing on teams, so that's like doing the thing is really, really critical.
Yeah.
Cool. And actually, that just made it's a great segue for the next question we have.
Yeah.
And this is from Belen, so I'll try to translate as we go. It's like, she would like to know what's been the process of writing a book in 4 hands, because that's what we say here in Spain. How did the idea come, and what was the process like?
Yeah. Do you want to take that, Michael, or should I?
Well, as you can tell by our incredible communication, it was it was super easy. It was really difficult. It was really hard. It was like one of the hardest things I've done professionally. I think one of the things, we joke about this all the time, one of the things that was really hard was like we had to come up with a unified voice for the book as writers, which we should have been able to do given our
Because we
experience.
write about coming up with unified voices in the book.
Right. That was
Yeah.
hard though. That was really hard. And one of the things we had to do is just edit a lot. Like we'd have to start, for me, I just had to get it out there however I could, and then edit my my voice out of it so that it was really reader focused, and we were speaking as a unified voice to the reader. We wanted people to read through the chapters. We split the chapters half and half, but we wanted people to be able to like not know that it was a different author for a different chapter when they got there. So but yeah, it was really a journey. Like actually writing, it was only like 4 months, but planning and editing and everything else.
Mario, you were
like
one of our
2 years.
tech reviewers, right? Yeah, I'm sure. So the most difficult process that I've ever gone through, for like editing process I've ever gone through, was the technical reviewing phase, which was we asked 6 of our colleagues and peers to read the book and just comment on, just provide a comment in Google Docs on the manuscript. Like, you know, do you see anything that seems technically wrong, or would you emphasize something else? And between Mario and everybody else who did it, we had over 800 comments in our in our manuscript.
Sorry.
No, and it was great. It absolutely made it a better book. And we at one point, you know, I'm in San Francisco and Michael's in Chicago, which is 2 time zones away and like more than 1,500 miles. I couldn't begin to tell you how many kilometers that is, but pretty far away. So we basically took almost 2 full days of like working days, and I got a conference room at work, and we just got on video and we went through everything, and we resolved comments, we assigned comments to change things, and it absolutely made it a better book. But man, that was such a difficult seeming task. One thing I will mention.
We're so grateful for everyone who did that, but I seriously had a panic attack the first technical review we got back.
One thing that I will mention is, you know, a lot of people write books and then develop workshops based off that book. We kind of went the opposite way. We've been doing this as a workshop. In fact, yesterday, Michael, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter, yesterday was our 4-year anniversary of doing our first workshop at Confab Intensive. And what was nice about that is it kind of like gave us our content, right? Like we had a workshop, like a fully fleshed out workshop that we could turn into a book. So it just like coming up with the content was honestly one of the easiest parts, like at least the core content. So I appreciated doing that. So now we're doing workshops that are based on the book, that are based on the workshop. So
And this is the moment when you plug in the one that's upcoming?
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing one in November. We're really excited about it. There's still an early bird pricing, but it goes up October 1st. And it's already almost halfway full. So I'm just going to drop a link in the chat in case anyone's interested for professional development. Feel free. And we're always happy to answer questions about it too.
We'll definitely share that through UX Writers España. So